The UFC is going back to Perth in August for UFC 305, and most likely Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya is going to be the main event of that card. But Alexander Volkanovski also shared this announcement on his Instagram story, and my initial reaction was, no, Volk, you better not be fighting, especially if you're fighting Taporia. But then I stopped and I thought about it and I was like, you know what? Wait a minute. Maybe he should fight on this card. And I think Volk should fight in August. And here's the thing. I think Volk should not fight Ilya Taporia. I believe that Alexander Volkanovski should fight Mosvar Evloev. And I know your initial response is going to be, but Volk deserves a rematch. He's a long reigning champion. He's done all these things for the featherweight division. Like, how are you not going to grant him the rematch? And my response to that is, you're absolutely right. Volkanovski deserves the rematch for everything he's done, in his career. But just because you deserve something doesn't mean that it's always the best thing for you. And I'm a big Volkanovski fan. I want him to end his career on a good note. And regardless if he ends up losing his next couple of fights, I'm always going to be thinking about Prime Volk, how good he really was. I'm not going to jump ship and say Volkanovski sucked all of a sudden. I'm a big Volkanovski fan. But like I said, the more I stop to think about it, I think that Mosvar Evloev is a perfect fight for Alexander Volkanovski and for where he is in his career. Let me explain why. Look, Volkanovski is coming off two devastating knockouts, and whether you would like to admit it, that is absolutely going to affect his confidence. And even if he takes a long time off to go back in there against Ilya Taporia, you know, the demons are still going to be in his head, man. The fact that he just got knocked out twice, I feel like it would be smart for Volkanovski to get a fight in between, an easier matchup. And we're going to talk about Mosvar Evloev. I'm not saying that he's an easy fight, but an easier stylistic matchup in a fight where he can regain his confidence. Because I feel like in the UFC, when champions lose, the quick thing, the thing that ends up happening is that we give these champions an immediate rematch, and I feel like that's not always the smartest thing. Like, can you imagine if like Kamaru Usman, got knocked out by Leon Edwards, and instead of rushing back to a trilogy, he would have fought like a Bilal Muhammad, and maybe he's able to be Bilal Muhammad, but at least you're able to regain your confidence. And I feel like we don't really talk about that enough, about the fact that every time a dominant champion loses, we're quick to give them a rematch. And I understand why. Like, I'm not saying that you should not give them a rematch because they absolutely deserve it. But what I'm saying is that it's not always the smartest thing for your career. And I think that if Volkanovski is able to beat Mosvar Evloev, because I do think he's an easier stylistic matchup. And, Mosvar Evloev doesn't have any finishes in the UFC. I mean, he's gone to split decisions. Most of the times he's winning a unanimous decision. He's mostly a grappler. And I think that's a fantastic matchup for Alexander Volkanovski, where he's coming off his career. And the fact that he's not facing a guy with so much power, I like that matchup for him. And, you might be disagreeing and say, no, he needs to go back in there with Taporia later in the year. But my thing is like, look, Taporia is only going to get better. He's a bad stylistic matchup for Volkanovski. And I was saying that even before Volkanovski faced Islam Makhachev in that rematch, I always thought Taporia was just a bad stylistic matchup for Volkanovski. And I think that if he's able to fight Mosvar Evloev at UFC Perth in August and is able to get a win over him, one, I think it does a lot for his career. And let me tell you why. Because if you're able to have Mosvar Evloev on your resume and you defeat a fighter who's 18-0, I think that's great for your legacy. And even if Volkanovski, let's say he beats Mosvar Evloev, and at the end of the day, he still ends up losing against Ilya Taporia, like, he would have cleared the featherweight division besides the champion. And I think that would be incredible for his career, rather than Volkanovski, going back in there with Ilya Taporia immediately or even later this year and then getting knocked out again. You know what I'm saying? So I think the more you think about it, I think Mosvar Evloev is the perfect fight for Alexander Volkanovski, especially if he wants to be active. a fight where he doesn't have to necessarily be worried about getting knocked out. I mean, Mosvar Evloev hasn't really TKO'd anybody that is in the UFC, so he's always going to a decision. He's a very good fighter. I'm not saying that he's not. I'm not saying that, Mosvar Evloev doesn't have a chance of beating Alexander Volkanovski, but I like his chances. I really do like his chances because Alexander Volkanovski is gonna have the advantage in the striking. We've seen that he's a good, that he has good takedown defense, that he can defend takedowns. We saw in that fight against Islam Makhachev. We've seen that Volkanovski has been really preparing his grappling in that fight against Islam Makhachev and stuff like that. So I feel like this is a very good matchup for Alexander Volkanovski, and I believe that if he's able to win this fight, he's going to be able to regain his confidence. And I think it even gives him a better shot against Ilia Topuria, even though, I probably wouldn't necessarily pick him against Topuria. I think it's a better chance than just Volkanovski going back in there and getting the rematch, even though, like I said, I know he deserves it. I know he deserves it. But I think if Volkanovski is able to beat Mosvar Evloev, I think it would just do a lot for his career. I really do believe that. And I feel like, I don't see why Mosvar Evloev would not accept a fight against Alexander Volkanovski. I really do believe this is a fight to make. I know maybe some of you guys were expecting Mosvar Evloev versus Brian Ortega, which is fine. I don't mind that matchup either. I just think that I want the best for Alexander Volkanovski, and I think that even if he takes time off, which is going to help his chin, which is going to help him, recover from injuries and take some time off from the game, I think that's going to help. But I think he has lost his confidence. And I think that even if he wants to pretend that he hasn't, man, when you're coming off two devastating knockouts like that, that's absolutely going to hit his confidence. So I don't understand why we're not encouraging Volkanovski to get a fight in the meantime, an easier stylistic matchup where, there's not a high probability of him getting knocked out, and I think if he fights Mosvar Evloev, there's not a high probability of him getting knocked out. I actually would probably pick him to win that fight by a decision. So why not make this fight? I think this would be the perfect fight for UFC Perth. And maybe Topuria should fight Brian Ortega. I don't know if he really wants to be active, or maybe he's going to wait for UFC Spain. But I just don't like the idea of Volkanovski just sitting out, especially at this age, and thinking that he has actually a good chance against Topuria, even if he's able to recover, because I really do believe that Topuria is just a bad stylistic matchup. And then Volkanovski is going back in there with time off, with still not being as confident as he used to be because he's coming off two devastating knockouts. So I feel like the perfect matchup is Mosvar Evloev versus Alexander Volkanovski. I know this might be a hot take because, I think a lot of people, I don't know. I don't know if it's really a hot take because I feel like not a lot of people are excited for Volkanovski versus Topuria too. I think we kind of know how that fight is going to go. I know that Volkanovski won that first round, but if you go back and watch that fight, I feel like Topuria was kind of setting him up, and that first round was actually pretty competitive and pretty close. Even though you could kind of edge it out to Volkanovski, I think you could also make a solid argument that that first round could have gone to Topuria because he did land the better shots. He did land pretty good low kicks. So let's make that happen, guys. Mosvar Evloev versus Alexander Volkanovski. I think that would be a perfect return fight for Alexander Volkanovski. And like I said, if he's able to get a win over Mosvar Evloev, it just does do a lot for his resume. I mean, he would beat a fighter that's 18-0, that especially like he would beat a fighter that's 18-0 coming off a knockout loss. And even if he later fights Topuria and loses, I mean, look at the names on Volkanovski's resume. So I really do think that it would do a lot for Volkanovski's resume. I really don't believe that he should come back. And even if he fights Topuria later in the year, let's say November, December, I still don't like his chances. I really don't like his chances. And I feel like if he's able to get a fight in between that is not a really dangerous stylistic matchup where if he wins, it would do a lot for him. It would help him regain his confidence. Why not let that happen now? I understand that there's a risk, right? Because if Volkanovski loses against Mosvar Evloev, then there's a chance he doesn't get the rematch. But in my opinion, then if he loses against Mosvar Evloev, that means that maybe he's not at that level anymore. And to me, that's better than seeing Volkanovski getting knocked out for the third time. I mean, that's the sad truth. I really do believe that. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts. Do you think Volkanovski should really be fighting Ilia Topuria? Or do you think, like me, do you agree with me that maybe he should fight Mosvar Evloev in August at UFC Perth, and maybe it will help him regain his confidence?